Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift into one of those darker corners of European history that makes you wonder if royal families had too much free time and not enough hobbies. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and maybe pour yourself something warm, though preferably not a cup that Catherine de Medici herself prepared. Trust me, you'll want to keep your beverages poison-free tonight, because yes, Catherine de Medici, the Italian-born Queen of France, has gone down in history with a reputation as the ultimate poison queen. Woman supposedly so obsessed with chemical warfare that she kept her own squad of female poisoners charmingly nicknamed the Flying Squadron. And while that sounds like a Marvel franchise gone wrong, the reality is, well, slimmer. Think less heroic flight, more slow-motion stomach cramps, ending in a royal funeral. But before we get too cozy with her alleged poison cabinet, let's set the mood. Catherine wasn't born in France at all. She was Italian, specifically a Medici. And if you know anything about the Medici family, you know that being just a wealthy Florentine banker was never enough. This clan wanted everything: art, palaces, popes, queens, and apparently poison. They were basically the Renaissance version of billionaires, except instead of launching rockets, they launched assassination attempts. Catherine was born in 1519, the daughter of Lorenzo de Medici and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. Sadly, her parents died within weeks of her birth, leaving baby Catherine an orphan before she could even blink her famously dark eyes. In most families, this would be tragic. In the Medici, it was Tuesday. Her uncle, Pope Clement VII, scooped her up because, of course, she was immediately under papal guardianship. Imagine growing up with the Pope as your babysitter. Not exactly storybook cozy. Now, because she was both rich and Medici, Catherine was basically marriage bait. She was pawned off in 1533, at the ripe age of 14, to marry Henry, the second son of King Francis I of France. Henry wasn't supposed to matter much, since he was the spare and not the heir. But in one of those classic dynastic plot twists, his older brother conveniently died of an ear infection. Yes, the heir to France lost the crown because of a tennis ball injury, followed by a nasty ear infection. So Henry got the throne, and Catherine found herself Queen of France. Unfortunately, her marriage wasn't exactly the stuff of bedtime romance. Henry was deeply, profoundly, almost cartoonishly in love with someone else's mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Diane wasn't just Henry's lover. She was basically his life coach, stylist, and boss rolled into one. Catherine? She was the awkward wife in the background, popping out children and watching her husband wear her rival's colors into battle. A fun domestic arrangement. And here's the thing, Catherine was not considered especially beautiful. Contemporary sources described her as short, a bit plump, with bulging eyes. The poets politely skipped her in their verses, which tells you everything. But she was clever, extremely clever. She might not have been Henry's favorite, but she made herself indispensable in other ways. And, spoiler alert, clever queens with hurt pride and too much time on their hands often get reputations for poison. Now, did Catherine personally go around sprinkling arsenic into wine goblets? That's up for debate. What's undeniable is that she presided over one of the most toxic courts in Europe, literally and metaphorically. Her court was packed with intrigue, scheming nobles, jealous mistresses, and, of course, the infamous Flying Squadron. And no, the Flying Squadron wasn't a group of Renaissance fighter pilots. It was a carefully assembled squad of about 80 women beautiful courtiers Catherine employed to seduce, distract, and spy on the powerful men of France. Picture them as an early modern intelligence agency, except their weapons weren't gadgets or guns. Their weapons were perfume, flirting, and occasionally poison. Sleepy bedtime espionage at its finest. This squad allowed Catherine to maintain control over volatile factions in court. Noblemen couldn't behead each other in the king's council if they were too busy falling for Catherine's hand-picked honeypots. At least that was the theory. In practice, it created a soap opera so scandalous that Parisian gossips had enough material to last decades. Now, let's pause here. You might be thinking, okay, but where's the actual poison? We'll get there. Poison was the nuclear option of the Renaissance world. Firearms existed, sure, but they weren't subtle. A crossbow in the back was suspicious, but poison that was deliciously sneaky, slow, invisible, and it gave you just enough time to blame it on God. Or maybe bad shellfish. Catherine was rumored to keep her poisons in tiny hidden compartments, sometimes in the carved ring she wore, other times in perfume bottles. Allegedly, she had an apothecary named René, who was a master of the dark arts of poison. He supposedly prepared powders, pastes, and liquids in his workshop, which Catherine kept tucked away like a secret treasure chest. If true, her nightstand must have looked like a mix between a pharmacy and a witch's pantry. The French nobles noticed too. Pretty soon, if someone in court got sick with mysterious stomach convulsions, whispers flew. Catherine did it. Did she? Hard to say. The problem with being a clever, Italian-born queen in a paranoid French court is that any natural death instantly became suspicious. Doubt must be poison. Dysentery? Definitely poison. Dying in battle from a cannonball? Somehow? Still poison, but there were few deaths suspicious enough to make even historians raise an eyebrow. For instance, the suspiciously timed death of Jane d'Albret, the Queen of Navarre in 1572. She was perfectly healthy one moment, shopping for wedding clothes for her son, and then suddenly keeled over after allegedly smelling a poisoned glove. A poisoned glove. Very medieval James Bond. And who was the prime suspect? Catherine, naturally. Whether Catherine really orchestrated Jean's death is still debated. But what's undeniable is that Catherine's court became synonymous with poison rumors. It was part fact, part propaganda. The Protestant pamphleteers who despised her Catholic influence painted her as a literal witch queen, stirring cauldrons and murdering her enemies with Italian potions. To them, she wasn't Catherine de Medici. She was basically Maleficent and Widow's Black, and that's the paradox of Catherine's reputation. She may not have actually poisoned half the nobility of France, but she certainly benefited from the fear that she might. In a court where betrayal was practically a group hobby, Catherine's poisonous aura gave her the one thing she needed most: control. But let's float gently back to her personal life. Catherine had a brood of 10 children because apparently she believed in quantity, if not quality. Only 7 of them survived infancy, which, for the 16th century, was practically a record. Her sons would become kings, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, all of whom were spectacular weak, sickly, or unlucky. Basically, Catherine's genetic contribution to France was a series of rulers who looked like they needed a nap and maybe some chicken soup. This, in turn, forced Catherine to rule behind the scenes as regent and power broker. Picture her shuffling around the Louvre in black morning gowns, whispering advice to pale teenage kings while plotting marriages, alliances, and allegedly assassinations. It's not exactly the fairy tale queen image, but it was effective, and of course, the darker Catherine's power grew, the more the poison rumors spread. It didn't help that she adored astrology, alchemy, and weird science. She had astrologers like Nostradamus on speed dial, because why not double down on the spooky aesthetic? Her palace was full of strange laboratories, darkened chambers, and reports of glass coffins used to test poisons on animals, or, more disturbingly, on condemned prisoners. So, was Catherine a mad poisoner queen? Or just a savvy ruler whose enemies couldn't resist painting her that way? The truth is probably somewhere in between. But here's the thing. When you're known as the Poison Queen, you don't need to actually poison anyone. The fear alone does the job. Alright, that's a comfortable place to rest our thoughts for now. Poisons, perfumes, and a queen in black wandering her candlelit halls. In the next stretch, we'll drift further into Catherine's world, her infamous role in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the ongoing soap opera of her sickly sons, and yes, more whispers of poison dot, but for now, let's let the flying squadron linger in the shadows, waiting with their poison gloves and honeyed words. Hey, again. Still awake? Or half asleep and floating along with me? Either way, let's keep gliding through Catherine de Medici's very long, very gothic resume. Because if part 1 was about her reputation as the Poison Queen, part 2 is all about what happened once her fragile little royal children were shoved onto the French throne like undercooked pastries. So Catherine had 3 sons who all managed to become kings of France in succession. And honestly, if you line them up, they look like a Renaissance version of the Addams family. Sickly, pale, perpetually stressed. None of them exactly screamed mighty ruler. More like needs herbal tea and a blanket. But because France couldn't find anyone better at the time, each one of them got crowned anyway. Lucky Catherine. Let's start with Francis II. Poor Francis. He became king in 1559 at just 15 years old, which sounds young, but hey, by 16th century standards, that was practically retirement age. He had married Mary, Queen of Scots, which sounds glamorous until you realize Mary was also just a teenager. So the two of them were basically awkward high school sweethearts, except with crowns and responsibilities they weren't remotely prepared for. Francis was tiny, sickly, and constantly in pain from ear infections. Yes, again with the ears. If the French crown had a kryptonite, it was apparently the human ear canal. His reign lasted barely a year. He died in 1560, leaving Catherine as regent for her next son, Charles IX. Now Charles was, how do we put this gently? He was the kind of boy who, if he lived today, would probably be told to hydrate more and touch grass. He was moody, frail, and had a tendency to cry when stressed. Which, to be fair, who wouldn't when your job is running France in the middle of religious wars? Catherine basically had to babysit him while also running the kingdom, and it was under Charles's reign that Catherine became entangled in one of the darkest episodes of French history. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. Let's set the scene softly. France was divided at the time between Catholics and Huguenots, basically French Protestants. Think of it as a very violent family feud where both sides had armies and grudges. Catherine tried to solve this tension with marriage diplomacy. She arranged for her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, known to history as Queen Margot, marry the Protestant Prince Henry of Navarre. The idea was that a Catholic princess and a Protestant prince tying the knot might soothe things over. A wedding for peace. Spoiler, it did not soothe things over. The wedding brought thousands of Protestants into Paris, a very Catholic city. Tensions were high, and then just a few days later, chaos exploded. On the night of August 23rd and into the morning of August 24th, waves of Catholics began massacring Protestants in the city. It started with targeted assassinations of Protestant leaders, then spiraled into mobs hunting anyone with the wrong religious affiliation. The streets of Paris filled with screams, bodies, and blood washing into the Seine. Estimates of the dead range from 3,000 in Paris alone to as many as 20,000 across France. It was horrific. It was chaos. And of course, Catherine was blamed. Was she behind it? Some historians say she orchestrated the killings after surviving an attempted assassination by Protestant leaders. Others think she was caught off guard, and once the violence began, she had no choice but to let it run its course. Either way, the massacre permanently stained her reputation. And guess what? Poison rumors got tied in too. Apparently, Catherine had poisoned the minds of her sons with Catholic fanaticism. That was the propaganda line anyway. Charles IX himself never recovered from the guilt of the massacre. He supposedly had nightmares, hallucinations, and breakdowns where he imagined the blood of Protestants dripping from his hands. Combine that with his already fragile health, and you have a recipe for disaster. He coughed himself into the grave by 1574, at only 23 years old. Enter Catherine's third son, Henry III. Henry was different. Let's put it that way. He had been elected king of Poland before his French brother died, so he was technically both a Polish king and a French heir. But when Charles IX kicked the bucket, Henry said, "Merci, Poland," and ran back to France to take the French throne. Henry III was flamboyant. He loved fashion, jewelry, and surrounding himself with handsome young men he called his mignons. He was pious one day, then indulgent the next. Sometimes he would whip himself in public as a sign of devotion, then go back to partying in silk outfits. The people of France were confused, and probably a little worried that their king cared more about earrings than governing Dot through all of this. Catherine remained the steady, black-clad figure in the background, still scheming, still negotiating, still occasionally accused of poisoning people who dropped dead at inconvenient times. By now, Catherine was old. But old age didn't mellow her reputation. If anything, the poison stories grew darker. She supposedly had her astrologers predict deaths, and then, what do you know? Those people conveniently died. She supposedly tested poisons in hidden chambers of the Louvre. She supposedly carried around tiny golden boxes filled with lethal powders. It was the 16th century version of being accused of having potions in your handbag. And while much of it was likely propaganda, Catherine didn't exactly discourage the rumors. Fear, after all, was one of her best weapons. When nobles thought their wine might suddenly curdle into a death potion, they tended to behave. By the time she died in 1589, Catherine had survived her husband, survived all 3 of her sons turned kings, and survived the endless waves of enemies who whispered about her poison cabinet. She was 69 years old, an impressive run for a woman everyone thought was constantly brewing something toxic. Ironically, she died of natural causes. No poison needed. And yet history remembers her as the Poison Queen, the woman in black. The one with a squad of seductive spies and a pantry full of arsenic. It's a dark reputation, but also kind of fitting. Catherine de Medici lived her whole life in shadows, a foreign queen in France, a widow, a regent, and a mother to fragile kings who couldn't quite hold the throne together. Poison was her myth, her aura, her weapon of fear. And whether she used it or not, it kept her enemies awake at night, just like we are now. So let's drift back for a moment. Picture Catherine, dressed all in black, her flying squadron moving silently through candlelit corridors, nobles glancing nervously at their cups. The queen doesn't need to lift a finger. Her reputation does the killing for her. And that, softly, is Catherine de Medici's legacy. Hey friends, still here? Maybe drifting in and out? That's alright. Tonight's story isn't going anywhere fast. Catherine de Medici's shadow stretches so long over French history that we could wander around her court all night and still not run out of odd little corners to peek into. So, we've talked about Catherine's sickly sons, but she also had daughters. And if her boys were fragile monarchs, her daughters were drama factories. Let's start with the most famous, Marguerite de Valois. better known as Queen Margot. Margot is remembered as one of the most scandalous princesses in European history. And considering the competition, that's saying something. She was witty, beautiful, intelligent, and extremely fond of romantic entanglements. Let's just put it that way. Some called her passionate. Others called her promiscuous. Catherine, her mother, mostly called her a headache. Margot's big historical claim to fame was her marriage to Henry of Navarre, the Protestant prince we met earlier. Remember? The one Catherine thought would calm the Catholics and Huguenots with a wedding? Yeah, that went poorly. The wedding ended with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and poor Margot was stuck in the middle of it, literally locked, inside the Louvre while the streets outside turned into rivers of blood. A romantic honeymoon, clearly. Her marriage to Henry of Navarre, later King Henry IV of France, was predictably awful. He had mistresses. She had lovers. They spent more time plotting against each other than actually being married. At one point, Margot was even imprisoned by her own family for her rebellious behavior. She once wrote that she had been married against her will to a man she did not love and forced to witness rivers of blood on her wedding day. Not exactly Hallmark material. Margot eventually wrote her memoirs, which, fun fact, were among the first ever published by a French woman. And in them, she did not hold back. She dished on the scandals of the French court, her affairs, her family's dysfunction, and the poison rumors that swirled around her mother. If Catherine had wanted to carefully curate her legacy, Margot's tell-all did not help, and Margot wasn't Catherine's only daughter with a chaotic story. Another was Elizabeth de Valois, who married Philip II of Spain. That's right, Catherine's daughter got shipped off to marry one of the most humorless kings in Europe. Philip was known as the Prudent, but really he was just deeply boring and extremely controlling. Poor Elizabeth was barely a teenager when she married him, and within a few years, she was dead at age 23 from complications of childbirth. Some whispered, of course, that poison might have been involved, because apparently in the 16th century, poison was the explanation for absolutely everything from indigestion to broken marriages. Catherine's daughters then became part of her poison mythology. Every scandal, every premature death, every quarrel somehow circled back to their mother. Poison became Catherine's invisible fingerprint across Europe. Now, let's drift back to Catherine herself for a moment. Because what's interesting about her story isn't just what she did while alive, but how her legend grew after her death. Catherine died in 1589, just a few months before her last surviving son, Henry III, was assassinated. That assassination ended the Valois dynasty altogether. The crown passed to her former son-in-law, Henry of Navarre, Margot's estranged husband, who became Henry IV of France. Catherine had spent her entire life trying to secure her children's dynasty, and in the end, it slipped away anyway. Irony can be cruel like that, but the poison stories didn't die with her. They blossomed. Protestant writers across Europe loved painting Catherine as the villainess behind every French tragedy. Pamphlets and plays portrayed her as a witch queen stirring cauldrons of venom. Later historians, too, leaned into the narrative. And honestly, Catherine didn't help herself with all the astrology, alchemy, and laboratories she kept. If you're trying to avoid being called a poisoner, maybe don't hang out with Nostradamus and build secret glass chambers for experiments. Just a thought, one particularly enduring legend was about Catherine's supposed poison book. Some swore she had a secret manual, bound in black, full of recipes for deadly powders, poisonous perfumes, and toxic gloves. Of course, no such book has ever been found, but the rumor was so delicious that it persisted for centuries. Even today, if you Google Catherine de Medici, the word poison is never far behind Dot, and let's not forget the Flying Squadron. Historians now argue about how much of that was real and how much was exaggerated. Was Catherine really sending 80 beautiful spies to seduce and poison her enemies? Or was it more like she kept a circle of fashionable ladies-in-waiting and gossip filled in the rest? Probably the latter. But honestly, the myth is much more fun. Picture a Renaissance Charlie's Angels, except with lace collars, corsets, and arsenic. It's a bedtime image worth keeping. What all this shows is how Catherine's legacy became less about reality and more about perception. She lived in an age when women in power were automatically viewed as suspicious. If you were clever, ambitious, and unwilling to stay in the shadows, people assumed you must be scheming with poison. Catherine leaned into that aura, whether intentionally or not. And once a reputation like that sticks, it never really washes away. So in the centuries after her death, Catherine's image transformed into almost a caricature. Playwrights, novelists, and historians painted her as a dark puppet master. She appeared in operas, dramas, and eventually even films, always with a sinister air. Even if the real Catherine was more politician than poisoner, her legend was too juicy to resist, and maybe, as we drift into the quiet part of the night, that's the most fascinating part. Catherine didn't need to poison everyone. She just needed to convince people she might. Fear is a powerful tool, and in the candlelit courts of Renaissance France, fear was often stronger than fact. So let's let Catherine fade into the shadows now. A queen in black silk, walking softly through echoing palace halls, surrounded by whispers. Did she really carry poison in her rings? Did she really send women to kill with perfume and kisses? We may never know for sure, but the rumors are still with us centuries later, and sometimes the rumor is more powerful than the truth. Still with me? Or maybe you've drifted halfway to sleep, and that's perfectly fine. Tonight's story is meant to carry you like a slow river, and this river just keeps winding. We've floated through Catherine's life, her sons, her daughters, and her poisonous reputation. Now let's drift wider into the world she lived in, a world where poison wasn't just a tool of fear. It was practically a cultural accessory because Catherine didn't invent the whole poison queen aesthetic. She inherited it. From Italy, of course. Back in her homeland of Florence and Rome, poison was practically an art form during the Renaissance. Enter the Borgia family, the grand masters of this very dark craft. If Catherine was accused of dabbling in arsenic, the Borgias were accused of running a full-service poison empire. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, was whispered to have used poison to eliminate his rivals. His children Cesare and Lucretia Borgia were accused of handing out poisoned wine and beautifully wrapped toxic gifts at dinner parties. Were the rumors exaggerated? Absolutely. Did it matter? Not at all. To Europe, the Borgias embodied the idea that Italians had turned assassination into fine dining. Catherine, being a Medici from Florence, carried this Italian reputation with her into France. From the moment she stepped into the French court, nobles whispered, "She's Italian. She probably has a poison cookbook in her luggage." It was unfair. But once gossip starts, it rarely stops, and poison in the Renaissance had a certain mystique. It wasn't just about killing people. It was about mystery. You could never quite tell if a sudden death was natural or not. A cough, a fever, some cramps, it could be dysentery, or it could be arsenic. Who could say? That uncertainty gave poison an almost magical aura. It blurred the line between medicine and murder, and it wasn't just Catherine's court. Poison was everywhere in the gossip of European courts. Kings, queens, cardinals, duchesses, everyone was either accused of using it or terrified of being its next. Victim. This is where we get the legendary poison ring. You've probably seen them in movies, rings with a secret compartment under the gemstone, designed to hold a pinch of deadly powder. With one discreet flick of the finger, You could dump poison into a goblet. Very dramatic. Were they really used? Occasionally, yes. But mostly, they became symbolic of the paranoia of the time. Everyone imagined the courtier next to them could be wearing one, just waiting for the right toast. Perfume was another suspect. People believed poisons could be hidden in scented gloves, in fragrant waters, even in cosmetics. And that wasn't entirely wrong, because Renaissance cosmetics actually were poisonous. Here's a fun sleepy detail. Women in Catherine's day often painted their faces with a paste made of white lead to achieve that fashionable pale look. White lead, as you might guess, is highly toxic. Over time, it destroyed skin, caused hair loss, and slowly poisoned the body. But hey, at least it looked good in candlelight. Even rouge was sometimes laced with mercury. Lipsticks could be toxic too. Imagine getting dressed up for a court ball, covering your face in lead paste, your cheeks in mercury, and then slipping on a pair of scented gloves rumored to contain arsenic. Everyone at court looked glamorous and was slowly killing themselves at the same time. Fashion, but make it fatal. No wonder Catherine fit right into this culture. She didn't need to actually kill anyone. Her contemporaries were already half poisoning themselves just by getting dressed. Now, Catherine did take it a step further by surrounding herself with astrologers, alchemists, and apothecaries. She had René the Florentine, her personal perfumer, who some claim doubled as her poison supplier. His laboratory supposedly created both her signature scents and her more sinister concoctions. It's hard to say where the truth ends and legend begins. But the association of perfume, poison, and Catherine de Medici became inseparable. And here's the thing. Once Catherine was painted with the Poison Queen brush, she became the symbol of it for all of Europe. Later scandals in France, even long after her death, were sometimes blamed on her ghostly influence. If someone mysterious died in the French court in the 1600s, pamphleteers would say, but remember Catherine de Medici. Her reputation also spread into art and literature. Writers couldn't resist her. They cast her as the sinister queen in plays. Novels portrayed her as a master poisoner pulling strings from behind the throne. Opera composers gave her dramatic arias filled with venom. By the 19th century, she was practically a stock character, Catherine, the Poison Queen. And honestly, the story stuck because it fit the vibe. She always wore black after her husband's death. She consulted astrologers. She ruled through intrigue and fear. Her children were sickly, her court was scandalous, and she lived through wars and massacres. Even if she had never touched a vial of poison in her life, she still looked like someone who would. And in history, looking the part is often half the battle. So here's the sleepy irony. Catherine de Medici probably wasn't the greatest poisoner of her time. She may not have poisoned anyone at all, but she became the person history decided to blame anyway. She was the face of poison, whether she wanted the role or not. Let's picture it softly, a queen in widow's black, walking slowly through the halls of the Louvre. Her courtiers glance nervously at their cups, at their gloves, at her rings. She doesn't have to say anything. The silence, the rumor, the aura, it does the work for her. And that's how Catherine became eternal. Not through armies, not through monuments, but through whispers of poison that lingered long after she was gone. Hey friends, we're still here with Catherine de Medici, and by now you probably know her almost like a neighbor, just one with suspicious jewelry and a very dark wardrobe. We've wandered through her rise, her fragile sons, the massacres, the scandals, and the culture of poison that clung to her. Now let's ease into her final years and then watch how her story lingered, like a faint perfume in a closed room long after she was gone. So picture Catherine in her 60s. In Renaissance terms, that was ancient. She had survived plague, childbirth, wars, betrayals, and endless bad press. Most people didn't make it past 40. Catherine was still pacing through her palaces in her morning gowns, still scheming, still mothering kings who looked like they needed tutors more than crowns. Her body, however, was wearing down. Decades of stress, countless pregnancies, and the weight of ruling through constant crises had left her weak. But Catherine didn't exactly retire. She kept working, kept advising, kept pulling the strings of a dynasty that was, quite frankly, unraveling faster than a cheap tapestry dot by the late 1580s. Her last son, Henry III, was clinging to power. France was collapsing into yet another round of religious conflict, this time against the ultra-Catholic League. Henry was unpopular, flamboyant, and increasingly desperate. Catherine, still sharp but physically frail, tried to mediate between factions, but the world was slipping out of her hands. In January 1589, Catherine finally died, aged 69. The cause was natural, probably pleurisy, an infection of the lungs. No poison, no dramatic assassination, no sinister experiments gone wrong. Just an elderly queen fading quietly after a long, exhausting life. And yet, ironically, her perfectly ordinary death disappointed people. Many expected the poison queen to go out in a blaze of venom. Instead, she had just stopped breathing like everyone else. How anticlimactic. Her funeral wasn't even grand. Civil war had bankrupted the crown, so Catherine's body was buried with little ceremony in Blois. Years later, her remains were moved to Saint Denis, the resting place of French monarchs. But by then, her dynasty was already finished. Her last son, Henry III, was assassinated the same year she died. The Valois line ended. The throne passed to the Bourbons. All Catherine's scheming, all her poison rumors, all her careful maneuvering, it dissolved into dust. And yet, she remained. Not in power, but in reputation. Catherine de Medici became larger in death than in life. Protestant writers had a field day with her memory. They turned her into the ultimate villainess of France, the mastermind behind every massacre, every scandal, every suspicious death. She was painted as a cold-hearted widow in black, plotting with apothecaries, whispering to astrologers, slipping poisons into GOBLETS. In reality, Catherine had spent her life trying to hold France together through chaos. But history rarely rewards nuance. The stories of poison were juicier. By the 17th century, plays and pamphlets had turned Catherine into a kind of archetype. She was no longer just a queen. She was a character. The poison queen, the widow in black, the Italian sorceress in the French court. Her real political skill, her balancing acts, her survival, those were forgotten. What survived was the legend of the woman with deadly perfumes and a squad of seductive assassins. And the legend stuck. The 18th century adored retelling it. Voltaire, that great philosopher of the Enlightenment, called her a monster. 19th century novelists like Alexandre Dumas wove her into their romantic dramas, complete with poison bottles and secret passages. Painters gave her dramatic portraits, all shadows and suspicion. Even in the 20th century, films and operas leaned into her poison queen image, because who doesn't love a villainess in velvet? Meanwhile, the actual historians kept arguing. Was Catherine really a poisoner? Or was she just the victim of 16th century misogyny, where a powerful woman was automatically cast as unnatural, sinister, and deadly? The debate continues even today. But here's the sleepy truth. It doesn't matter anymore. Catherine de Medici has been remembered as a poison queen for over 400 years. At this point, the myth has become her reality. Legends outlast facts. So let's leave her there, softly. A queen in mourning black, wandering through candlelit corridors. Her flying squadron trailing behind her, nobles clutching their wine cups a little tighter when she passes. Did she poison them? Maybe not, but she didn't have to. The rumor was poison enough. And that's the final irony. Catherine de Medici became immortal not through monuments, not through victories, but through whispers. A queen remembered as deadly simply because people believed she might be so tonight. As you drift into sleep, remember her not just as the poison queen, but as the woman who turned fear itself into power. And centuries later, we're still telling her story slowly, quietly, as if she might be listening. Hey there. You're still with me, so let's not stop at Catherine. If she was remembered as the poison queen, she wasn't exactly alone in that poisoned hall of fame. History has a funny way of giving us characters who might not have touched a single vial, but who get remembered as if they carried an apothecary in their purse. So while you drift, let's wander past a few more figures who lived and died under the shadow of poison. Let's begin in Italy, naturally. Catherine's homeland was already famous for its poisons before she ever left Florence. You've probably heard the name Borgia, right? Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, and his infamous daughter, Lucretia Borgia. Poor Lucretia. For centuries, she's been painted as a femme fatale, slipping arsenic into wine goblets and laughing over the corpses. In reality, most historians think she was more of a political pawn than a poison mastermind. But her family's reputation was toxic enough, literally, that the rumor clung to her like perfume. The Borgias were said to use something called cantarella, a slow-working poison supposedly made from powdered minerals. Victims wasted away with stomach pains, leaving everyone whispering about the family's holy dinners. Did they really do it? Hard to say. But once again, the idea of Italians with secret poisons became a convenient story. Catherine, coming from Florence, just stepped right into that stereotype when she moved to France. Then we drift east to Russia. Fast forward to the Romanovs. Poison was always a popular rumor in their court too. Tsars and Tsarinas lived in constant fear of being slowly eliminated with a bad cup of tea. And who could blame them? When your nobles plot against you as a hobby, every drink feels suspicious. There's the famous case of Rasputin, the mad monk, who was supposedly poisoned with cyanide-laced cakes and wine in 1916. Except plot twist, it didn't work. He allegedly shrugged off enough poison to kill several men until his assassins gave up and resorted to shooting and drowning. Was the poison fake? Was Rasputin just impossibly stubborn? Nobody knows. But the story proves that poison legends follow powerful people like moths to candlelight. Now let's float back west, to England. Catherine's daughter-in-law, Mary, Queen of Scots, was rumored to have been nearly poisoned more than once. And Elizabeth I herself? She didn't need an assassin. She had her own makeup. Elizabeth used a fashionable white foundation called Venetian Cerise, made with lead. Yes, actual lead. She wore it for years, slowly poisoning herself in the name of beauty. Her teeth blackened, her skin aged, and her health suffered. So, in a weird twist, the Virgin Queen managed to poison herself more effectively than any assassin ever could. Speaking of cosmetics, that was another quiet, hidden way poison slipped through history. Women painted their faces with powders containing mercury and arsenic. Men wore wigs dusted with toxic powders. Perfumes sometimes contained noxious ingredients. People were poisoning themselves daily, all in the name of elegance. Catherine's reputation for deadly perfumes wasn't entirely wrong. It was just that everyone was already doing it. Then, if we take one more sleepy detour, there's the broader world of toxic politics. In the Renaissance and Baroque courts, accusations of poison were basically the equivalent of modern conspiracy theories. If someone important died suddenly, obviously poison. If a king wasted away slowly, must have been poison. If a queen had too much influence, definitely poison. It was the default explanation. And women in power, like Catherine or Lucretia, were especially easy targets. No one could imagine that they were just politically competent. Far simpler to say they carried deadly rings filled with powder, and yet the irony is that actual poisonings did happen. Plenty of nobles and royals kept apothecaries who knew all about arsenic, mercury, and nightshade. Doctors prescribed remedies that were basically toxins in small doses. The line between medicine and poison was so thin that most people couldn't even tell the difference. Drink a cure and you might recover. Drink a little too much and you might die. Which meant that, in a way, poison was everywhere, both real and imagined. So when Catherine de Medici gained her reputation, she was really just the poster child for a much bigger cultural obsession. People needed someone to embody that fear of secret deaths and invisible enemies. Catherine, with her Italian roots, her black gowns, her perfumes, her astrologers, and her dramatic timing, fit the part perfectly, and that's how she ended up in the same mental gallery as the Borgias. The Romanovs, Elizabeth with her lead makeup, and countless other unlucky souls remembered more for poison rumors than for anything else they did. When you step back, the pattern is kind of funny. The most enduring poisons weren't the ones in bottles. They were the stories. Once someone whispered that you were dangerous, the rumor spread faster than any toxin. And centuries later, we're still here, retelling it. So, as you drift off tonight, imagine Catherine not as a lonely figure in history, but as part of a larger cast. A stage filled with shadowy queens, eccentric czars, pale monarchs painting their faces with poison, and mysterious apothecaries in dimly lit rooms. None of them needed to kill with a vial. The whisper alone was enough. And that whisper was the deadliest poison of all.